Affermage stock lease model. Now, in this category of arrangement, the operator, who is the leaseholder, is responsible for operating and maintaining the infrastructure facility that already exists and services. But generally, the operator is not required to make any large investment. However, often this model is applied in combination with other models such as build, rehabilitate, operate, transfer. And in such a case, the contract period is generally much longer than the private sector is required, is generally longer, all right? The contract period is generally much longer, and the private sector is required to make significant investment. It's longer. It's not like the management contracts, which we saw is shorter. And the difference between them is the technical. Under a lease candidates, the operator retains revenue collected from customers of the facility and makes a specified lease fee payment to the contracting authority or to the public sector. So after managing the facility, the people who pay for the facility, the revenues that are received from the payment from the customers, those revenues are retained by the private sector. But the private sector is required to make specified lease fee payment to the public sector. That is lease. But under an Affermage, the operator and the contracting authority share revenue from customers. Do you understand? So that's a difference. Under lease, the private sector retains all the revenues, but pays a fixed lease fee to the government or to the contracting entity. Under Affermage, the revenues received from customers are shared between the private sector and the public sector. And in the Affermage lease types of arrangements, the operator takes lease of both infrastructure and equipment from the government for an agreed period of time. The operator does what? Takes lease of both infrastructure and equipment. Both infrastructure and equipment from the government for an agreed period of time. And generally, the government undertakes the responsibility for investment and thus bears investment risks. But operational risks are transferred to the operator or the private sector. However, as part of the lease, some assets also may be transferred on a permanent basis for a period which extends over the economic life of assets. But fixed facilities like land are leased out for a longer period than for mobile assets. And the land to be developed by the leaseholder is usually transferred for longer periods, like 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, and so on. So what are the pros? The advantages: one, can be implemented in a short period, can be implemented in a short period of time. Number two, significant private investment possible. Period of time. Significant private investment possible, because these are longer periods. We saw in the, for example, the management contracts, there is little investment required from the private because they come in to manage existing infrastructure. In some countries, legally, and this kind of a model is legally and politically more acceptable. Legally and politically acceptable for more strategic projects like ports. Could be acceptable because of that lease. Ownership is not wholly transferred. Ownership is not transferred to the private sector. So it could be legally and politically acceptable. It could also be socially acceptable. Drawbacks: has little incentive, has little incentive. It has little incentive for the private sector to invest, particularly if the lease period is short. Risks borne by the public sector. Risks are borne by the public sector. Almost all risks are borne by the public sector. It is also generally used for existing infrastructure assets. Generally used for existing assets. Number four, there may be need to have regulatory oversight. Regulatory oversight required. There may be need for considerable regulatory oversight because of the legal implications of this kind of arrangement.